Welcome to Confessions of a Terrible Leader, where real leaders share the raw truth about the lessons they learned the hard way so you don't have to. Join our host, Layci Nelson, founder of Transcend Leadership Collective and former terrible leader. On this podcast, we invite you to step into the confessional and get real with the messy stories and behind-the-scenes reality of leadership. Let's get to it.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. I'm your host and former terrible leader, Layci Nelson. Today, I am so pleased to welcome David Cohen to the show. David, thank you for making time for us today.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I need to just tell our audience a little bit, our listeners, you are in for a treat today. This man has decades of experience. And he has his doctorate in organizational behavior from Boston University, as well as some graduate studies at Harvard. And he is an expert at understanding how to map the DNA and understand what's really going on culturally in an organization. And he even has a new book coming out. We will drop all the links at the end of the show so people can make sure they get their hands on it. Selecting the Best, Fostering a Workforce Driven by Values for Lasting Success. David, that is a lot. You have a lot going on. And this is not your first book.
No, this is the third. And now that it's in the final stages of being printed, my wife then asked me, so when are you starting the fourth?
Oh my gosh.
I said, I don't think I am. And she said, oh, yes, you are.
So there will be a fourth book.
It keeps you busy and motivated.
Awesome. David, reading through your experience is just fascinating to me. You've been not only working with organizations, corporations, understanding the American way of doing business, but I also see you have been on 5 different continents. So definitely experienced even the multicultural, cross-cultural aspects of leadership. I have so many questions. I probably have more questions than we have time, but you are a wealth of knowledge. I would love to know, just setting the stage for our listeners and just out of sheer curiosity, when you go in and decide, okay, the right next step here is I'm going to map the DNA of this culture, of what's going on in this corporation. How do you begin? What does your process look like?
Well, first I have to gauge that the CEO and hopefully members of the team are willing to understand that once they have expressed the DNA, it's not aspirational. They have to live it, because once you publish it, your employees expect you're going to do it. The good news is that 90% of the time they already know that and they're already doing it to some extent, but they're not always aligned. The second thing I always say to CEOs, and I learned that through experience, is I say to them one-on-one, when we go through this exercise with your leadership team, we just might find there's an outlier who's going to be holding you back, and you're going to have to deal with it. And when the CEO gives lip service to that, as has happened on an occasion, and then the values are in place and they don't deal with the outlier, the organization becomes very cynical and employees become very disheartened, because they really celebrate the values. And so that's where I usually start, and then begin one-on-one with the leadership, series of questions I have, the sort of secret sauce of revealing where they're really at, what they really think. And then once that's codified, drafted, actually, we measure it against what people in the organization at every level think.
What do you usually find when you dig into that? Do you see common patterns and gaps? I'm assuming there's always gaps. What are the things you find?
It's interesting. I was doing one with a company that was run out of Canada, a major logistics company, and they had an operation in Texas. And there was this one gentleman who'd been with the company 20-something years, who was very quiet during the entire focus group of getting the employees' perspective on the values. And at the very end, I would share what the executives say to show the gap in where it's going to be bridged, or how it can be bridged, or there's a disconnect and leadership is off base. And I shared with them what it was. And this gentleman, who had not said a word the entire time, smiled and said, I didn't think those guys at head office actually understood it. That's really encouraging. I find that 95% of the time, there's alignment between what the employees are thinking and doing and what leadership thinks is the right way of behaving. There's
That's
usually
great.
not a disconnect.
Okay.
I found one organization that there was a disconnect and they decided not to go ahead. And the disconnect was on the leadership team.
Hmm.
And there was a mistake made and they decided they're not going to roll out the values at that point because they were not going to have leadership leading by examples.
Okay. So if you find that there isn't often a big disconnect, what comes down to the heart of the work or the change that you're doing with the organizations? Once you say, you know what, you guys are pretty much in alignment, what's the next step?
Well, the next step is make sure that, see, values, they're nice words, but they mean
Right.
nothing without understanding the behaviors behind them.
Right.
And one way to explain it, because everybody thinks that, okay, if I define this word, respect, let's say, which is a common one, everybody understands that you just have to say the word respect. And that's
Right.
not true. And so, drawing on my global experiences, the way I explain it is this: respect in Southeast Asia is to save face with the leader. In other words, there's a deference to those in power. There's a deference to older people. And therefore,
Hmm.
if your boss tells you something, even if you disagree with it, you're not going to disagree with it in the meeting. Definitely.
Right.
If at all.
Right.
So that's respect. If I go to the Gulf region, respect is different. See, respect there is a tribal background. Respect there is I will socialize an idea, which means it might take me a month before I even start working on it, but I'll
Hmm.
socialize it. So even if my boss has agreed on it and it's got a green light, I'm not going to work on it until those that are impacted are on side with it and I find a way to sell them on it.
Mm.
In Europe, if you disagree with the boss, everybody kind of looks at each other, figures out who has the best relationship with the boss at that time, takes them out for a beer after work and tells them, there's a different way of looking at it.
Hmm.
Now, in the United States, there's a different kind of respect when it comes to if the boss says something you disagree with, you just raise your hand. Don't even raise your hand. Just in the middle of a meeting, you shout out, "That's really dumb."
Mm.
And everybody kind of says, "I'm glad he said it." And they all agree on it.
Hmm.
And the boss accepts it and they figure out a better way of doing it. Well, if you did
Hmm.
that in Europe, in the Gulf region, in Asia, you'd probably get fired. But if I acted as an Asian might in North America and have this really great idea, and I keep my mouth shut, and later on they find out I had a better idea, they're going to say, "What's wrong with you? How come you didn't
Right.
bring it up?" Well, I didn't want to disagree
Right.
with the boss. Disagreeing with the boss is a good thing. That's how we get innovation. That's how we get differences of opinion. So it's really the core of the work is capturing the authentic behaviors that define it.
Mm.
Now, here's the interesting part. In the research I've done and other people have done, the second most frequently used value among the Fortune 500 is the word integrity.
Hmm.
And then I say to people, so what's integrity mean?
Hmm.
And they start defining the other values. I worked with the chief of police in Calgary, Christine Silverberg, many years ago, and we were discussing this, and she came out with a brilliant idea. She said the Calgary Police Service will have integrity when we live our values without exception. So
Mm.
integrity is the sum total of living your values. Integrity is about keeping a promise. What do you promise?
Yeah.
I'm going to live my values. Therefore, when you live your values, you have integrity. Now, not
Yes.
everybody agrees with that. And I've had clients that insist that integrity has to be on the list. So
Hmm.
we work really hard to define the behaviors that are uniquely different from the other ones. And it's really difficult.
Right.
So that's some of the things that we do.
Yeah. What fascinating, rich work. In your work as a facilitator, as the guide leading them through this process, where does it start to get sticky? Where does it feel like, okay, this is hard. This is going to be hard work. I'm going to have to help guide this group. Is it just completely varied business to business, or do you see certain patterns?
There's a lot of different things that can happen. One thing happened with a gentleman in San Francisco that had 2 PhDs in advanced quantum physics. And when we told him what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, he thought it was really kind of airy-fairy and ridiculous.
Yep.
And then after I do the interviews, I take the executive off site for 2 days, sometimes 2.5. After the first day, he said, "Oh, I really see it. It really does make a difference, and it's different than the previous exercises like this that he's been through." So sometimes you get resistance that, I can state it, I'm the leader, so let everybody follow
Yep.
without
Yep.
getting any buy-in or
Hmm.
getting any reality check. Does it really work in the real world?
Yeah.
That's one obstacle you find. And the other obstacle sometimes you run into is that people think that a change in strategy is a change in culture.
Mm. Talk more about that.
So what's a change in strategy? There's this one bank in Australia that a CHRO that went online, it's on YouTube, and said, we're changing our strategy. We're becoming more people focused. We're going to become more agile. What it meant is we're going to get computers. We're going to get laptops. We're going to get tablets. We're going to be able to respond in the moment. And it's all about this technology switch. And then I look on the website and the values have been the same for over 100 years. So the behaviors are the same. Just because you're using technology, it doesn't change the behavior that's in your value set. So the culture wasn't changing. The strategy was changing. It's like when organizations say we want to be more innovative.
Yeah.
And my best example happened many years ago with one of the lottery corporations in one of the provinces. I got a phone call and they said, we need you to come out here right away and work with us on our culture. And I said, well, what do you mean right away? They said, like tomorrow. Why? Well, they had a government report that said that they were losing business to the borderline state because they had casinos. Younger people do casinos, not scratch and win, and that they were falling behind. They weren't making enough money for the government, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, so what are your values now? They said honesty, trust. And I interrupted them and said, so you're telling me that you're looking for a new value, so you're not going to have trust or honesty anymore because you got to change your values, your culture. No. We want to keep those. So I said, what do you want? Well, we have to be more innovative. So I said, well, innovation means what? But are you going to be respectful or trusting in the innovation? So what we needed to focus on was not the values. We had to celebrate the values so people can know it's a safe environment to work. The rules of the game weren't changing, but the behaviors for the role, what they were focusing on, the objectives they were focusing on, those changed. Therefore, some of the skill and knowledge and some of the other things had to change in order to bring that out. And they did. Many years ago, they became the first province in Ontario to successfully introduce online gambling.
Wow.
They did very well when they're doing very well. I always find it difficult when I see consultants come in and say, we're going to change your culture, knowing that whether it's from research at Harvard or MIT or anywhere else, 85% of culture changes fail within 18 months. And they say, we're going to change your culture, and everybody gets excited. We're going to change our culture. And I'm scratching my head because they're not changing their culture because they're not changing their values.
Right.
Think about your values and how they evolved in you. If somebody in the morning when you wake up said, oh, by the way, today is change your values day, and whatever you believed in before, you got to abandon and believe something new, how likely are you to do that?
Not likely.
No. Values don't change. Culture is rooted in values. That's the cornerstone.
Yeah.
And they say to change a corporate value, belief system, just one value can take 7 years and millions of dollars.
So how do I, as a business owner, I'm running an organization and I know there's something that there's some rot somewhere. I can't figure it out exactly. I can't put my finger on it, but I know we have what's typically in the lexicon used accurately or not, we have a culture problem. What is a good diagnostic? How can I start to really dig in and go, well, do I have a culture problem or do I have a strategy problem? Or how do I start to determine what the right course of action is to get us into alignment?
Okay, so there's two possibilities. One is your people really believe in the values and the culture. It's been successful. It's been positively reinforced. And because of various pressures or whatever, you're making or leadership's making decisions which no longer align with the values and the purpose of the organization to be expedient to make short-term money.
Right.
And people are now confused. That's why I often call the work I do a back to the future exercise. What got you there once will get you there again. You got to find out, are you in the leadership role the ones who are violating the values and have people confused? On the other hand, have you made a business change? Have you come under pressure because of competition from China or somewhere in the world, or you no longer have the lead product in the world, and therefore you have to change and change rapidly direction, which means what you were doing is no longer going to work for you.
Right.
But make sure you do it according to the values. And so now you've introduced this, but you haven't introduced it so people feel safe or comfortable that they're part of the solution. How do you know that? Well, the easiest way is to talk to your employees.
Right. Ask.
I don't, surprise. People say, how come you're so successful in talking with employees? I said, well, all I do is talk to the front line.
Yeah.
They tell me the truth. And then I reflect that back over the different levels of the organization. And usually there's a roadblock somewhere, and you got to be able to deal with that roadblock. And
Mhm.
somebody somewhere in the organization doesn't like what's going on, and they're not filtering the information down, communicating it clearly. So some people see
Mhm.
some people acting one way or focused on a project or an objective that doesn't align with theirs, and they're confused. The pyramid that I look at is this: values define who you are.
Mhm.
That's your ethics. That's your code of conduct.
Mhm.
The next level down in that pyramid then would be, what is our purpose?
Mhm.
What is our vision? In other words,
Mhm.
not what we are today, but what we will be. And it's got to be emotional to your employees.
Right.
The next is the strategic plan. And this is where I think companies make a mistake. They often will set the strategic plan and say, okay, what values can we change to align with the strategic plan? Oh, we
Yeah.
have a new purpose now.
Right.
No. You measure the success of the strategic plan. Will it move you towards your vision, your purpose, and will it
Yes.
maintain the values? If not, change the strategic plan. Don't change your values and vision and purpose.
Right. Or start a new company
Yeah,
because this is not the same thing.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, spin something off.
Yep.
And then if that's all in line, each
Mhm.
division can take that piece of the pie that's theirs. So
Mhm.
next level down is each individual. Now that creates a line of sight. I know that my
Yes.
objectives mean the team's success, the division success, the organization success. I know we're moving towards something that's meaningful. And I know
Mhm.
that if I am in a situation where there's no rule book or there's no previous way of dealing with it, as long as I live the values, I'll be safe. And
Right.
so I have a line of sight. Now, here's why this works. Every human being wants to contribute to something bigger than themselves.
Yep.
And people kind of roll their eyes. And I say, so are you a member of an organization, a church, a synagogue? Are you a member
Right.
of something in the community?
A sports team? Yep.
Why do you do that? Well, it's meaningful. That makes me excited. You give your discretionary money to that organization,
Yep.
but they'll give discretionary effort to the organization
Yes.
if they feel that they're being acknowledged for behaving correctly and contributing to something that's beyond their own workspace. I always
Yes.
find these reward systems where, I thank you for doing your job. It's kind of ludicrous because, the employee of the month probably should be the same person every month.
Mhm.
All right. But then you got to
Mhm.
switch it around so it becomes
Right.
meaningless.
It doesn't mean anything. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The fact is, you get a reward or recognition when you go above and beyond, not your job in your cubby, but you've contributed something bigger in the organization.
Yes. You're building bridges. Your other departments are your customers. Yes.
The best example of that somebody really understood the line of sight is the story that is associated with President John Kennedy when he was at the NASA Space Center in Houston, and he
Mhm.
would have a habit to talk to the front line. And he went up to one gentleman who happened to be the cleaner and said, "What are you
Mhm.
doing here?" And he said, "I'm putting a man on the moon."
Yes.
Imagine if
Exactly right.
every one of your employees
Mhm.
was able to say, "I'm contributing to your vision."
That's powerful.
Yeah,
Such a great
I've seen that with
example.
organizations. The old Cannot Labs, which is now part of Sanofi,
Mhm.
pharmaceutical in France, when it was Sanofi Pasteur, Cannot Labs, their vision was to make the world safer for children through vaccines.
Mhm.
Who the hell wouldn't want to work there?
Right.
When I was working with a janitorial group and we were doing something on their behaviors for their job, and one gentleman came to the group late and he kind of started to apologize. Said, "No, just sit in and jump in." One of the other guys later on in the focus group said, "We are the most important people here." Now, this is the same organization that solved the polio vaccine problem when it first came out, Dr.
Mm.
Banting. These are Nobel Prize winners in this organization. But these
Mhm.
guys, without a college, university education, tradesmen, said, "We're the most important people here." And I said to them, "Why?" Because if we don't clean the floor fast enough and somebody falls and has a concussion, we can slow down the cure for some childhood disease.
Mm.
We got to do our job and do it right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they meant it.
Such a great example.
That's when you really have an organization that everybody aligns because they understand the purpose is meaningful
Mhm.
and the values are clear.
Mhm.
One of the values is because it was a very caring organization that was focused on education and learning and growth. And there was a new
Mhm.
leader came in the organization speaking with me and he says, "What's going on here?" He said, "There's cannot time." I said, "What's cannot time?" He says, "Everybody leaves here at 4:30." I said, "It's a university. It comes from the University of Toronto. That's its DNA. If you have nothing to
Yeah.
do, you go home." I said,
Yeah.
Wait till you see the first day of public school. The parking lot's going to be empty because every one of them is bringing their kids to school, and they won't be here until 9:30, 10 o'clock. And he calls me up that day and he says, yeah, they didn't show up till 10:30.
You have so many powerful stories. I'm going to ask you now to share a story about your own journey and yourself
Fair enough.
in your leadership experience and growth as a leader, as understanding who you are and how you move through this world and influence people. Every guest we invite on the show, we welcome you to step into the confessional and share your own experience of making a mistake, one of your biggest that you're willing to talk about, a mistake, a misstep, whatever you want to label it, a learning opportunity in your own journey and how that shaped you as the leader you are today.
Oh, it's interesting. I was in education before I started this journey and passionate about education. And because of my own life's journey and history of struggling to learn how to read, I mean, I didn't
Mm,
read on grade level until I was in grade 8. I have amblyopia, which was called lazy eye. Back then in
mm.
the dark ages, they didn't know how to fix it. I had to wear a patch for 2 years in grade 7 and grade 8, and that's traumatic.
That's a rough time to have to wear a patch.
Any young person to have to wear a patch and be different.
Yep.
I loved learning, but it was really hard.
Yeah.
And so I became really passionate about it. The other thing that happens is I would always stand up for what I thought was right loudly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did things aggressively, loudly, assertively
Mm-hmm.
in helping kids. The focus, of course, of the school is to help kids. A lot of parents didn't like it because I tell them the truth about their kids and what they had to do to help them. And they always thought their kid was a genius or special or whatever. And I would say, they are, of course, but
Yeah.
they're not going to be successful. They're going to be frustrated, whatever it is. Then I would leave the school soon thereafter. In one case, it didn't help at all when I told the chairman of the board his kid needed help.
Yeah.
I realized later on, it took me a long time, but I realized later on that my learning struggle was exasperated by having an outburst disorder associated with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And once I became aware of that, I was able to channel my passion about what I think is right. And instead of becoming, standing on a soapbox and saying I was right and not listening to people, because sometimes I didn't listen. Sometimes I knew a teacher could do a better job and I'd get on their case a little too hard.
Mm-hmm.
Now I learned how to moderate that and find different ways of saying it, and until they think it's their idea. And then I say, gee, what a great idea you have. Go ahead and do it.
Wonderful. Yes. What a skill to develop.
It's about, instead of having answers, having questions, but have questions that
Yes.
lead them to the answer you want in some cases.
Yes.
Yeah.
Learning how to ask great questions is definitely a learned skill worth putting the time in for.
Yeah.
What a great example. And thank you for being willing to share something so vulnerable about your own journey and your own story. I think what really resonates for me is the degree of self awareness that was required to get to that point of recognizing this maybe isn't serving me as well or the people I want it to serve well. And then being willing to dig in and figure out what's going on and how do I do it differently. Did you have to learn that, or was it pain, or was it internal? How did you get to that point?
My wife.
Good old women.
You have to have a partner in life that cares.
Yes.
And she would question it, would
Mhm.
support me at the different schools we were at. When we moved to Canada 40 years ago, and after I left the school I was at here, my kids weren't going to leave here. They were young. They were 10 and 12 at the time that I
Okay.
left the school, and they loved it here.
Mm-hmm.
We had moved a lot, so they were sick and tired of moving. And
Yep.
so I decided to go into consulting. And as I worked through that in consulting, I realized my wife was right. There were different ways of approaching things. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to accept that I was right in what I was doing. I just wasn't right in the way I was getting the message across. And
Yes.
so I had to change that. I always knew as an educator about ADHD, but there used to be this myth that it used to be outgrown in adolescence. It's not. There's such a thing
No.
as adult ADHD. I think it's gone to a ridiculous point where now there's 4 different types of ADHD.
Right. It got TikTokified.
Yeah, I mean, give me a break. My version of it's complicated by outburst disorder. That was getting me in trouble. So
Mhm.
when I got into that and got into therapy for it,
Yeah.
and take my pills.
Yeah.
Because if I don't take my pills, it's going to be an interesting day.
Oh my goodness. What a fantastic story, and gives so much more depth to why you're so effective and powerful with the work that you do. So
Thank you.
thank you so much
Thank you.
for sharing that with us. Clearly, you're a man of deep wisdom, experience, insights. Knowing now that you had a background in education, you're an excellent communicator. I can see where that comes from. So thank you for taking time out of your day to share with our listeners. I was taking notes for myself during your discussion. So much good insight. Where can people find you, David, if they want to follow up and get more and order that book?
I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
That's why I use my middle initial S, because there's thousands of David Cohens in this world.
Yep.
David S in Toronto, so that pops up.
Okay.
You can at www.sagltd.com is the website.
Okay. We'll drop that in the notes, everybody, so you don't have to write it down. We'll have it there.
And the book link will be out by, the publisher said, by the end of this month.
Okay.
But it'll be on my website. I'll send it to you. You can have it. So
Thank you. Perfect.
Good for that.
Excellent. We will make sure we get all of those links. Thank you again. It's just
Thanks for
been
inviting me.
wonderful.
I
Yes,
appreciate it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was fun.
was
This was a
fun.
good conversation.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, you know the drill. Until next time, go manage like a leader.
Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. If you're feeling brave and have your own terrible leader story that you'd like to share, head over to transcendleadershipcollective.com/podcast to fill out a guest application. We'd love to hear from you. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is hosted by Layci Nelson and produced and edited by Fixation Point Productions. Music is by Leif Olson and Mary Scott from the band The Number of Months. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is a free leadership resource offered by Transcend Leadership Collective. If you are ready to refuse the limits of average leadership and join the leadership revolution, visit transcendleadershipcollective.com to check out our offerings for engaging workshops, strategic planning, and more. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. And until next time, go manage like a leader.